without further ado, let's turn to our panel. And my first question is, I'd love for each of you guys to just take 1 or 2 minutes to tell us the organization for which you do fundraising, and just very, surface view of what is your fundraising model. So why don't we start with Sherri and go this way.
Okay, my name is Sherri Shaner, and I'm with the organization of Peninsula Bridge. And what we do is we provide academic and enrichment opportunities for low-income middle school students over the summer. And as far as our fundraising strategy is concerned, very similar to the raising more money, which is now the benefit model. I used to work for the organization, and it sounds like we're going to talk about it a lot. And what that's about is just finding donors who are interested in your cause and cultivating them. And if people aren't interested, not strong-arming, just saying, great, they're going to go out and do something else good in the world, it's not going to be my cause. So being able to filter that and always be doing fundraising each step of the way with the potential donor's permission. You never want to be, getting into their space. So that at the end, if you do your cultivation right, then a gift will come. So it's taking a more longer-term approach to fundraising as opposed to the short-term gift. It's involving funders.
And it sounds like you're very focused on individual donors.
Yes.
Awesome. Alan?
I think the hat I'm wearing here today is I'm on the board of FLY, which was a SV2 grantee many years ago and has stayed in the family. Krista, the ED, spoke at the end of the meeting this year. I'm chair of the development committee of FLY. I've done fundraising for a lot of nonprofits though over the years, and certainly worked in this benefit method that Sherri mentioned and other methods. From golf tournaments to auctions to a style show once. So I have a lot of experience with different approaches: capital campaigns, annual giving campaigns.
And Alan, could you give us just a snapshot of where does FLY's money come from? How much is
FLY? Sure. So FLY is a great example of the sort of hybrid funding model where they get a significant portion of their budget from government contracts to provide services. They also raise a lot of money from individuals and some from corporations and foundations as well. Their breakdown is not dissimilar to what the boring presentation sort of showed as being kind of the typical breakdown of where gifting comes from, mostly individuals. And of course the initiative FLY faces, like a lot of organizations that have relied on government contracts for part of their funding, is that our governments are increasingly impoverished and as a result don't have as much money as they used to. So that then puts greater stress on the need to make up for that shortfall with more fundraising.
Great, thanks. Chris?
Hi, Chris Murphy, Director of Marketing and Development with Living Goods. If you don't know about Living Goods, we sort of like to refer to ourselves as the Avon of pro-poor products. We operate sort of Avon-like networks of micro-entrepreneurs who go door to door in East Africa, selling life-saving and life-changing products to poor consumers. Our overall objectives are twofold. One, to reduce under 5 child mortality by 15%, and 2, to build a fully self-funded model within 5 to 6 years of launching in a country. The second objective sort of has implications on our fundraising strategy, because we are building a revenue model that is meant to generate enough profits through the sales of the products to our end beneficiaries that we shouldn't need to rely on fundraising indefinitely. So we really focus our fundraising strategy on foundations and high net worth individuals who look at making a grant as sort of startup capital. It's a venture capital kind of approach. A lot of the folks that we work with, a lot of like the people in this room, sort of share our philosophy of building a double bottom line business and see the grants that they make to us as being a way to get our operation up and going so that eventually we don't have to rely on a donor capital. So right now about 90% of the grants we receive come in the range of $100,000 and up. And so we really don't do any individual fundraising, principally because we don't want to build a fundraising sort of workforce that will ultimately, we don't want to have that cost center anymore. So that's kind of our strategy.
Great. So we got a good variety here of what we're focusing on for fundraising. So the next question I want you to answer, and let's start with Alan for this one, is what's, just top of mind if you had to choose just one thing you think every SV2 partner should know about fundraising, what would you say? So of course, Alan, you'll be speaking as, a peer since you're a partner. And then Chris and Sherri as staff of our grantee organizations. What's one thing you kind of wish we all could know so we could be helpful to nonprofits?
I do too.
How you can morph them together.
So I would say, first of all, that you need to know that fundraising doesn't just involve asking people for money. And I think I wasn't here for Chuck Owen, but I think he said something similar to that. That yes, there is asking people for that is part of fundraising, but there's a lot of other activity that goes into fundraising, from identifying prospects, cultivating prospects, thanking people who have made gifts, and so on. And I say that is very important because I think that everybody who's involved with nonprofits should be involved with fundraising. I think that's the number one job of every board of a nonprofit. And if you're on a board, you should be thinking of that as one of your big value adds, and not necessarily because you're going to ask for money. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. Maybe you're not comfortable with it. Maybe you will become comfortable with it. But there's a lot of other stuff that needs to be done that you could be doing, and so you should be. And secondly, of course, that in order to be effective at any aspect of raising money, you need to be personally supporting the organization that you're talking about, right? I mean, to have the moral authority and yourself to be trying to enlist other people to support the organization. You must be supporting the organization. Mm-hmm. And everybody's capacity is different. It doesn't mean any particular amount of money or whatever, but you should be giving it at a level that for you is generous if you're expecting to be able to inspire other people to do the same.
Thank you. Let's go Chris next.
Sure. I guess the one thing I would probably say is that there is no one right way. I think our organization, Chuck Slaughter, our founder, does not have a fundraising background. I do not have a fundraising background. I spent 10 years in advertising and marketing before this. Chuck built a travelwear company before launching Living Goods. And what we've really, our fundraising is developing a style that suits both our own personal styles as well as our business model, and knowing that there are a lot of conventions out there, whether it's mailings, events, auctions, these types of things, but they don't really complement what it is what we're doing, and also both of our personal styles of how we go about trying to raise capital. So I think it's a lot about finding what works best for you and your organization.
Great, thanks.
My answer is going to be a little surprising, probably it's not as intuitive, is that as fundraisers, one of the most powerful things you can do is really get to know who the end user is of your services and really have a clear understanding of what you do. So I want to give you an example. So when I first started at Peninsula Bridge, so I heard all the technical stuff. We provide 5 weeks of academic and enrichment for our kids over the summer. We review what they've learned, and then we preview what they're going to learn over the school year so they can get a leg up. So one of the first things that I did is that I started talking to former students, parents, to get an idea of what we really did. And what they started to tell me is that it built my confidence. I had people who looked like me, who believed in me and started challenging me. And as I started to succeed, I started believing in myself. So do you see how that changes Once you start to understand truly what you do, yeah, it's important to know all the facts and how you deliver services, but really you need to know, how it's affecting whoever is receiving services. And as you start to fundraise, what you'll start to find is that when you're meeting with people, the words that become most powerful in inspiring people to give aren't going to be your words necessarily, it's going to be their words. So if you're involved with an organization, that would be the challenge. You can't learn and do a good job fundraising just in the boardroom, I don't think. So it's up to, I think, the organization to also put those stories up there for you, but sometimes that can't happen. So if partners can take the initiative to maybe when there's a testimonial that's going to be done, go along with the staff member. Get a chance to talk to the student, get a chance to talk, whoever that might be. And I think you'll find that the fundraising becomes much easier because you're so inspired and that becomes infectious to whoever you're talking to.
Thank you. So I just have one last question before you guys get to jump in with whatever questions you have burning in your mind. And that is just for each of you to kind of speak, you're all kind of coming at this from a different angle, so just to speak to your specific angle. So if we could go this way, and I'd love for Chris, you know, it's mostly major gifts, foundation, and some corporate. So if you could speak a bit more about, what is kind of the power or the benefits of going after that kind of money. And Alan, if you could, you're coming at this as a board member and as the chair of the development committee, if you could just give us a few more thoughts on how specifically as a board member can take leadership on this and be helpful and work with the executive director. And Sherri, if you could speak to your big focus, which is individual giving, what's the advantage of individual giving for an organization? What top of mind should we know about individual giving, just to kind of dig a bit into these areas so that people can ask more questions specific to your expertise if they want.
Okay.
So for foundations, corporations, major gifts, and first off, the ask is a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking to give money.
It's their business.
Yeah, so there is never any ambiguity around what the intentions are behind the discussion. So, they are vetting us as we are trying to, get their support. So that makes that conversation very easy. It's always top of mind. Another big advantage, I think, with some of the folks that invest in our organization is that they have deep experience in the sectors that we are working in. They know the markets that we're working in because they probably support other organizations. They understand the challenges that we're dealing with. Right now in Uganda, has the world's worst performing currency. So when you look at some of our key performance indicators and some of our metrics, if you don't understand the local currency and some of the international sort of dynamics happening right now, you'd think that we weren't doing as well as we really are in the kind of given in the current market context. So they're really sort of dialed into the area that we work. Another thing I'd say is that they help connect us to a lot of other potential grant makers. So after they do their due diligence, they look at an investment, as they've done their homework, and this is an investment that they believe will have a significant return. They want other investors to do the same. So they become sort of a supplemental fundraising force. A lot of our major supporters, we've gotten that way. We got one grant who then said, you should talk to A, B, and C, made good connections, and did that for us. So they become sort of an ancillary sort of fundraising force. And then the last thing I'd say is when you look at the other network of their grantees, there's a lot to learn. So there's things we can learn from other organizations, things that the foundations have learned from working with them. Even in some cases, partners that we work with. One of the supporters. I've mentioned two supporters. One is the Lemelson Foundation up in Oregon. They support a lot of product inventors, and so things like cook stoves and solar products. We then become a nice distribution system for those partners. So they kind of help direct us to some interesting innovations that might benefit from our distribution. Another example here closer closer to us is the Midiar Network. They have a strong HR and talent capacity that they're helping us with recruiting in East Africa, and they've connected us to partners in technology that are helping us build a mobile platform. So the overall sort of theme, I think, is that they really become sort of a nice strategic complement to what we're doing and help connect us to their strategic partners, funders. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so first, I think of it as sort of board level things and then individual things. So the board level thing, first of all, is that the board should have a culture of participation in fundraising. I've gone on a couple of boards, not recently, thankfully, but in years past, where you look around and you realize that people don't really see fundraising as being their job, or they see maybe a couple of board members, but everybody else isn't really there to do that. I actually went on a board once many years ago where somebody commented at a meeting, well, of course, you don't get on this board because you're interested in fundraising. This isn't that kind of a board. Like, well, what other kind of board is there? And in that case, very interestingly, it was it had to be a long-term project, and it was over a period of 5 or 6 years as board development to completely change out that board and get people on there who understood that this was a very important part of their job, and the difference in terms of the level of funding for the organization, of course, is fantastic. So that's number one, is the cultural recognition that this is in fact every director's job, some more than others, of course, but every director's job. Secondly, is education. Sherri made a great point about educating yourself really deeply about the organization, which you should be doing anyway if you're on board. But it enables you to be so much more effective. And then there's this kind of education, coming to a course like this, reading a book like this. I actually, for Fly, I was so taken with this book, I wanted every member of the board to read it, and so I underwrote, handing out copies to everybody at the offsite, because I thought it was just so important to try to make sure that everybody on the board got it. And this, again, not only to help you, because you can more easily plug in if you understand, but also in your role as a director, one of the things you're supposed to be doing is overseeing the organization's strategy, and are they executing on that strategy? Are they going about fundraising in a sensible and rational way? And in order to do that, you need to be a little bit of a student of it. I mean, what is a sensible and rational way, and are you in fact doing the kinds of things that are best practices, and so on, and so you need to educate yourself about what that means. And then the next thing is to find a need and fill it. Find a way to plug in. I mean, maybe you're on the development committee, maybe you're not, but one way or another, there's stuff that needs to be done, and are you helping to do it? Are you maybe you hate the idea of asking people for money, but how about calling people who gave money and thanking them? You could do that, and it turns out that's one of the most important ingredients in successful fundraising. Is
May I make a point on that? Yes,
yeah.
really, because this is something that's always bothered me as a grantor to organizations. And I've had a situation recently where my husband and I, we did a pledge and we fulfilled our pledge, and I've never heard one word. Thank you for the final payment, I am appalled, and there's a part of me that wants, I don't know, I do want to bring it to the attention of someone. Who would you recommend I bring it to the attention of?
Probably the ED.
Okay.
I mean, that's something that the ED should know. Or maybe a board member if if you feel more comfortable talking to a board member. But yeah, I mean,
And it just appalls. It absolutely appalls me, because I would consider continuing supporting this organization, over the next 10, 15 years. But it just really
I
Sour.
think research shows it's one of the main reasons for lapsed donors,
You
is
didn't
that
even
people
get
don't
anything
feel
like-
appreciated.
No, nothing.
Wow.
And it was a significant gift.
Yeah, there you go.
And it was a personal relationship
Mhm.
with the organization.
Yeah, that's just a classic blunder.
Okay.
So there again, there's stuff you could do as a board member, things that need to be done, and and it doesn't necessarily have to involve actually asking people for money, to roll up your sleeves and get in there and help. So. you
And I
should.
actually like that. I like that idea about, well, then taking on the responsibility. I'll be the one who goes out and thanks.
Yeah.
I would be more comfortable in that situation. And it's an important role. It absolutely is.
Hugely important.
Yeah.
Hugely important, as your story illustrates.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. Let's just have Sherri. Go ahead. We can have Sherri later.
Well, Sherri could certainly respond to this too. The point you made, Ellen, a minute ago, I find bedevils me on every board, and that is, you said the board should be a fundraising board. That is the job of every board. And yet, I periodically often hear from people on philanthropic boards, oh, well, I don't do that, or I told them being other board members, when I joined that I wasn't going to do that, comfortable at the table, whatever. And so but no one heard me or whatever. I mean, those kinds of statements. On boards where you find that to be the case, how do you work with your fellow board members, either to change that or change out the members?
Well, I mean, there are cases where the term limits are your only choice. But I do think culturally, you can change it by talking about it a lot, by trying to insist that everybody at least understand what the strategy is for fundraising, and then by giving those kinds of people jobs that they can do, right? I mean, that don't, because usually when people say, well, I don't do fundraising, what they mean is, I don't want to ask people for money. I don't want to do the ask. Okay, fine. But there's lots of other stuff to do. And if you can enlist them that way, maybe after doing some of those other jobs for a while, it turns out they're not going to be so reluctant. But some of that depends on the organization's strategy. One of the key things, and Sherri's an expert on this, I think, one of the key things here is in this benevolent strategy is you don't ask people for money until they're begging to be asked, right? I mean, it's all a low-hanging fruit strategy where you're cultivating and cultivating and cultivating until the person is saying, why haven't they asked me for money already? So that when you finally do ask them, it's not a hard conversation. It's kind of like you're talking about, they're
They already
in the
know the
business.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're following that kind of a model, it's a lot easier to be asking people for money. It's not like you're cold calling people and saying, hi, I'm from the Police Benevolent Association.
The hardest part is getting the appointment. But once you have the appointment, they know what you're there for. So
Yeah, you
once
have-
you
well,
get that far,
It's
it's just a matter of
Sure,
asking.
you call it permission-based, right? Where they've given you permission when
Right.
you have the appointment.
Can I go a little bit of hot topic just to kind of leverage what he's saying?
Sure.
So one of the things that I've seen is you talked about thinking or how to change the culture. What you can do as an SV2 partner if you're on the board is that have that be part of the board meeting. Who are some of our top donors? Do we have any major donor gifts that came in? They did great. Who thanked them? Have they been thanked already? I mean, not that you want to get into the minutia of what's going on, but that could be a board responsibility. We don't do that at the board level, but we do it with the development committee, and it just dawned on me that would be a great thing to bring to a board meeting.
Well, we do the
To
dashboard.
make sure,
We do the
yeah.
dashboard at the board.
Mhm.
Don't you do that?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I've been treasurer
But I
on
think-
multiple boards, and I always thought it was much more important to focus in on the development report. Who are the hot prospects we were approaching right now? Does anybody have a connection to any of them and want to go along with the ED or the development director to visit them? did we just get money in from, wasn't this wonderful, let's acknowledge, say thank you, sort of, all say, wow, that's great, and so if somebody knows that person, they can say thank you in person, and
Yeah, it's in multiple ways. Yeah.
All of those kinds of things, we actually tried to get, in a lot of cases, unless there were really dire issues, the general financial report would be more of a consent item than anything else, because the big interest was development. Where's that revenue coming in?
Yeah.
Because the budget can be sort of, figured out in advance in those cases, unless you've got currency issues, but that's usually not our problem.
We've been working at Fly on a dashboard, a development dashboard. It's not as easy as it sounds, and the bigger the organization, the harder it gets, because you're talking about some fairly complex data streams that have to be distilled into a kind of a one-page report. But that's why dashboards are, that's a Silicon Valley buzzword right now.
Yeah.
Every company doing dashboards to manage their company, and you can do the same with a nonprofit. So the development dashboard is a great reporting item at the board. So to your point about how do you change the culture of a board, yeah, it's an agenda at every board meeting. Here's our development dashboard. Here's what's happened in the last month. Here's what's going on. Here's what we're doing. And yeah, does anybody know whatever?
So I think just asking those key questions as you become on a board helps to slowly change that culture to make people think about it, I think, which goes back to the education. So I'm supposed to talk individual donors and why we, so our development strategy, we've got the corporations, foundations, but we do focus a lot on individuals. So about 50% of our funding comes from individuals. And the reason why is because corporations and foundations can change their focus areas. And they're usually, larger donations. And so we're an organization that probably will not necessarily go out of business or have an earned income stream that's going to support our organization. So we're dependent on lifelong donors. And lifelong donors, where you're going to find them, are people who are really passionate about education, they're passionate about kids, and those are going to be your individual donors. So as far as our strategy of finding donors, I think I shared with you before, not making any assumptions is the big thing of who would be interested and who would not be interested. I can't tell you how many times I thought, it's perfect, this person's going to be so interested in what we do, and nothing. And people that I happen to invite to events or approach and talk to them about it are so interested. There's never a rhyme or reason. So I think part of individual fundraising is to not make any assumptions about anybody. And there are people who maybe don't spend money on things that you think are important or that would show that they would spend money on a nonprofit, who will give incredibly generously because that's what they value. So again, the individual fundraising, I think it takes potentially more time because then the corporate and foundation piece, because you're writing a grant. For the individual, you need to be, I think, very careful about, you approach everyone, but it's the listening part to find out, are they saying I'm not interested at all, or I'm not interested now, or, I want to keep in touch. So those types of things, as far as your follow-up is concerned, all have to be really somewhat precise. There are sometimes you're going to be guessing, but that's why the ideal situation is to have somebody who's already involved with your organization, i.e., board members, have a relationship with the people that are being introduced to the organization. That way you can, work together to decide what's going to be a good strategy in the follow-up. Some people only want an annual letter once a year. They love your organization. They don't need to be bothered. Others want to be updated every summer. They want to go to all your events. They'd like to meet the kids. They'd like to talk to family members. So the individual approach, I think, is stronger. You get lifelong donors, but you also need to make sure you've got kind of the back-end office set up so that you know how you need to be doing the follow-up with people. And you need to be able to customize all of that. And that can sometimes be challenging, but that's why it's great to have board members. Because as you start to customize, everyone's going to be cultivating in different ways.
I'd like to make a comment in regard to board members, and when I go out to site visits, most of the time, I'm only meeting with the ED or the financial development person or whatever. Recently, I do some of my giving in the Midwest, in Minneapolis, and it's interesting, in Minneapolis, it's very different than the Bay Area people. Minneapolis, I would say 50% of the time, I have a board member at the table with the other nonprofit representatives. And I have to say, when I see a board member sitting there, it makes me think more highly of the organization.
Absolutely.
And I haven't seen that in at least the agencies that I've gone to out here. I very rarely will ever see a board member. But in Minneapolis, it seems to be more of a common thing.
Interesting.
It's great, and that's another way
Yeah.
that board members can
Great.
plug in, right? And say, hey, bring me along. I'm not gonna ask this person for money, but
Right.
I'm happy to come to the meeting. I'm happy to talk about why I'm so excited about what the organization's doing.
And I know for me, I appreciate that they're giving me their time.
Yeah.
Because they're not being paid to be sitting there at this table with me. I very much appreciate that they're giving me the time.
I think
so
it's
that-
because the pace is so much, I mean, it's fast here. People think
Yes,
they don't
yes,
have the
yes.
time, which is not really right,
Yes.
but I think that's a really great point.
Absolutely.
I think that
That's a great.
should be, I think all major cities probably have a fast business pace, but I think it's, your point is interesting. You know, at one level, it's maybe cultural. You know, being from the Midwest, I think a lot of these relationships last in families for several generations. Right? So it becomes part of the fabric of a family to be part of X Foundation and to represent in the community. I have a question probably for Curtis and Sherri. The comment was made earlier about approaching corporate foundations. I used to run one once upon a time, and when I did, I learned that one of the ways you manage demand is that you require that organizations you give to be sponsored, if you will, by an employee. That is to say, the employee has to give a lot of time to X organization, and only then will the foundation and the company consider a donation or any kind of in-kind donations and so on. It's a very effective screen, obviously. But have you had experience in building up a following in getting inside that kind of structure so you can get support from a large corporate foundation that has such a requirement?
I think for us, we haven't had a really strong, we haven't developed that as much. That's something that we're going to be talking about doing a bit more. I think next year. Another organization, that's in this organization, there was another organization I worked in that worked with people with disabilities to help them find competitive employment. So there was a natural partnership with corporations, and yes, it was all employee funded. And there were many times where, we found different buckets of money as well. There was the foundation, and there were also people from different departments that had, different budgets that would sometimes sponsor us. So at Peninsula Bridge, we haven't done that yet, but I have in the past. And you're right. I think the corporations and foundations, they're people too. And so a lot of times we will try to cultivate relationships with them. Sometimes it's going to be appropriate and sometimes it's not because we're not their focus area. But I think creating that relationship and at least letting them know that you're out there and you keeping a watch to see if their focus area changes, then you'll, be kind of a step ahead. I guess at least if they know you, but you probably have.
I mean, so we don't have any volunteers. If we had volunteers, we'd need them to be in Uganda, which creates some complications for local employment. So I think from the corporation side, it's really more businesses that their model itself is aligned with ours. So we would be, we do actually talk to Avon, Tupperware, Amway, the big direct selling businesses. Interestingly, though, we talk to them less about trying to get their financial support, and what we want them to do is to learn from our business model as much as we can learn from their business model. So we look at them more of a strategic sort of alliance because, we're an open source model. What we hope is that some of these companies would adapt what we're doing and apply it themselves in the developing markets so that they can help build the economies there. So when we look at corporations, we look at them more through a possible sort of replication of our approach rather than making a financial support for the organization.
And Ellen, would you mind sharing, if you can, what Fly puts on their dashboard? I'm just kind of curious for some of the boards that I'm sitting on.
Yeah, it's interesting. My approach really is to try to make it a full management dashboard. So I wanted to have expenses and as well as revenues on the dashboard. But that isn't, when you think about sort of the if it's going to be the report of the development committee, expenses aren't really in our bailiwick, right? I mean, that's a different committee, right? So we don't have, so it's not, it doesn't purport to be what, the CEO of a company would want as the dashboard to run the company, right? Because it doesn't have the full picture. But what it does have is a really granular presentation of the relevant development data. So it's got the categories of corporate, foundation, major donor, etc. It's got what are our top target individual donors and corporate donors and foundations that we're pursuing this month. What experiences have we had so far this year? What triumphs last month? Did somebody make a gift or whatever? And then it's measuring how we're doing with bar charts, measuring how we're doing against our goals and how we're doing against last year. So you can see really at a glance how it's going in terms of the sort of the big picture, as well as the more granular picture of this particular person, that particular person, and so on. And of course, it's very useful at a development committee meeting, but because then you're really, that's all you're talking about. But even at the board meeting where you only have a few minutes, you're putting it right out there for everybody. Hey, this is what we're doing. These are the immediate goals. This is big picture how it's going, and then this is little picture, very granular. We're talking to XYZ Corporation this month. We're talking to this foundation. We're talking to these 10 people about whether they're going to give gifts to the organization. And I think it does tend to the point about getting other board members involved. People start to relate. Oh, I see. It's not. You're not sitting around calling people at dinner and asking them for money, right? I mean, this is a much more involved and intricate, elaborate, nuanced kind of process than maybe they appreciate it.
Add just one thing to that. I've used dashboards all my life, not in the nonprofit world because I come from the profit world, but something that might be relevant in terms of thinking about using those dashboards. It kind of sparked in my mind, Ellen, depending upon who the audience is, if it's the development committee or it's the board, one of the things that I try to use and present in dashboards is metrics that track behavior I want to see. So if I were doing a dashboard for fundraising, I want to make sure I'm acknowledging all the efforts that are not just who brought in the dollars or how many dollars, but how many thank you calls did we make, what percentage of our donors were thanked, how many of our donors have we had communication with in the last X period. So think about measuring those behaviors you want to tell people they need to do, and congratulate those efforts, even if they're not, oh, Joe brought in dollars, because there were 14 meetings before Joe asked that set up that money.
Yeah, it's a great point. In fact, it's something we've been talking about on the Development Committee of Fly is could we get that granular? It becomes a practical matter of how do you gather the data and assemble it and so on. But you're absolutely right. If you could get that granular, how much better? How many thank you calls did we make last month? People who gave money. How many times did we call somebody and ask them if they want to have coffee, not because we're going to ask them for money, but because we want to ask them for their suggestions.
But you can get that data if you think it's important to get that data. To get that data, you have to track that data, which means you have to say you're going to do it, and then you have to track it.
Yeah.
If it's important for you to do, you can do it.
Well, you're right.
At what
You
cost?
know, you kind of get into, you know, this is a bigger picture sort of thing about being on the board of a nonprofit, is that nonprofits don't have as much staff as for-profits, right? And this for me is a frustration a little bit, I frankly, in my experience dealing with nonprofits, is I'm kind of used to saying, okay, here's what we need to do, you know, and those other people over there, they're going to go do it. And there aren't other people over there. There's one person, and they're really overworked, and that's an issue. But if you can figure out a way to do it, see, a lot of Salesforce, you know, is doing. Salesforce will give you software for your nonprofit. It's really quite remarkable, and they'll even provide some consulting and stuff so that you can implement it. And if in theory, you can get Salesforce to generate this kind of data just the way a for-profit company would. But as with a for-profit company, it's only as good as the input, right? I mean, in other words, the Salesforce has to report their contacts with potential customers in order for that to be in the database. And the volunteers for a nonprofit have to report what they did in order for that to be captured in the database. But if you know, this is kind of the advanced course, but boy, if you can get that cooking, then you're really wrong.
Psychologically, it's just really important in communicating what kind of behavior is valued in the organization.
Well, that's I think the key to what you're saying, because one of the great uses of a dashboard is helping the board manage itself. Because as we know, sitting in board meetings, especially in nonprofits, 10 board members will throw out 10 things they think are important, and the staff people are, you know, trying like crazy to figure out what they have to track and manage. So if you create a dashboard and it has 6 metrics on it, great. And if somebody says we ought to do more thank you calls in the month of March, if that makes it through the screen on the board onto the dashboard, then it's valued by the whole board. If it doesn't, it's just somebody else's good idea that's nice to have, not a must-have, right? So the notion of having a dashboard that the board owns is a really interesting and I think very valuable productivity tool, if nothing else, because that's a way for the staff to sort of survive all these, you know, free-for-alls where everybody throws out things they personally want to measure. So, yeah, I mean, I think that concept is really valuable in terms of saying, okay, we have these 10 ideas, 2 of them are going to make it on the dashboard, let's get it.
I would also argue that it has a huge ripple effect down to people outside of the board, even outside of the organization, in terms of the volunteers. For example, the Hillsborough school system has just culturally said it's important to us that parents volunteer. And they say, keep track of your hours. Now, nobody's giving us timesheets, but they do collect them, and it does a couple things. It says to volunteers, wow, they think my hours are important. They're recognizing that I put this many hours in, and then they take those hours and they become fact, whether they're accurate or not. They become fact, and they use them to apply for grants, and that's why Hillsborough has all these awards for schools, because they literally have 35,000 hours a year of volunteer time, which becomes a metric for how important the school is to the community. And everybody that volunteered now becomes part of making sure these schools are that kind of community. It just communicates to the whole group.
Lindsay, you might know the answer to this. The GSB used to do that when they had the ACT office. I mean, that was one of the reasons that Stanford sponsored that thing, was that so they could monitor the amount of volunteer hours that their graduates gave to the community at
I don't
large.
know how much monitoring they do these days.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say that.
That seems to have changed in the last couple of years.
But I think that the point about acknowledgement is one. I mean, certainly that that Chuck made the other day in his presentation, and he said he had a million tips and tricks and tools and things. And so if you weren't there and you want to hear about it, we're happy to recap it. But he said, one board he's on, again, they want to elevate this to be important to every board member and to be something that every board member feels that they have a role in. And he said, so we start every board meeting by either going around and having people share what development activities they've done, or by the board chair sort of acknowledging, you know, Lynn hosted a house party for us, and, you know, Jamie did 5 thank you calls, and Eric set up 2 coffees with new people, Emily's brand new on the board, but she said she's been, like, just, you know, put it in her Christmas letter, and she's just been telling all her friends how much she enjoys the work. You know, that kind of an acknowledgement. And, you know, and he said, of course, it jars people maybe the first time, but the board that he's on, where that's just, like, you're expecting to come to the meeting and have that happen at the beginning, that was very powerful.
And everybody likes to have their name mentioned in those things.
It's
I could tell you,
No,
it
it's
would
very
be, one board that I joined was, a lot of the board members did not think that board development, fund development was anywhere part of their job as board members. And so one of the things that we started doing to encourage more involvement, even, you know, just getting it started, was I think it was usually, we had a meeting either end of November, beginning of December, and there would be a stack of holiday cards, non-denominational holiday cards. It says Happy Holidays, and inside it says, thank you for your support of, you know, the name of the organization. And during the board meeting, these would be sent out to individual donors from the past fiscal year, and we would all sign them. The staff would go around the entire board table, and while we're all talking about everything else, you would sign cards on all of this. And so it was something we all did. We all sent a group thank you to every donor every year. And it was, you know, the organization had been rather lax about thanking people for a while, and had a lot of donors had lapsed for, you know, not been acknowledged and stuff. And this actually helped bring some people back into the fold. And it also made it an easier way for board members who were new to the whole concept of fundraising and scared that I'm going to have to go ask my best friend for a whole lot of money, and I don't feel comfortable with that. And you know, let them know that there's other ways in, and there are other things you can do.
Mark?
This is for Sherri and Chris. What do you find is the best way for board members to interact with you? And how can a board member serve you better? Do you have tips that you'd like to share that would make us better as board members in interacting with you?
I have something on the tip of my tongue that is just that's perfect. That I was going to kind of segue on Wendy's idea. So if you have the idea that you want to, you know, do this tracking and have this dashboard, and Alan's very right, is that there are constraints sometimes on time. So my challenge to you as board members, which would absolutely help the staff, is to think one step further. So you're going to collect data, and we would like to measure this. Now, what could the board do to help with that? So it would be great in a board meeting for maybe a board member to say, well, what if we did this? What if we worked together with the staff to kind of create a visit report or some type of a report that we could fill out and then get to you, you know, a week before the board meetings? Do you see what I'm saying? So instead of just throwing out the idea, I think it's a good idea, and now staff has to figure out how to implement. If you could maybe think out or maybe brainstorm that second step, and then have a smaller committee or a point person that's going to work with a staff member to figure out how that's going to happen. That would be hugely helpful, I think, because it's not that the idea is a bad one or that staff would not even like to implement it. There are so many things that we'd like to implement, but maybe we don't have the capacity. But if the board can kind of think one step beyond, and we can learn from each other, figure it out, and then create some of those reports and other things that are going to be beneficial to everybody.
Well, and it's very different to have a board member say to fellow board members,
Yes.
I think we should all take 10 minutes a week before the meeting to do X, Y, Z. That's very
Yes.
different than when you have X amount of social capital. And by the way, people in the room are also your donors.
Mm-hmm.
So you're like tied both ways, right?
Yeah.
So I think it is very different to have a board member say, I'd like us to do X, Y, Z, or I think it's important to take the time.
It makes a huge difference. And we've had, you know, some new board members who've become on our board, and I've seen things shift even with people who were not necessarily thinking fundraising because of the questions that are being asked. by new board members, as well as Lindsay was saying, kind of taking the initiative, makes a huge difference. And then you start to see a bit of a culture shift, which is huge. Makes a huge difference for the organization. Sorry, I keep using the name huge, but it is. The adjective huge. Does that help?
It helps.
Yeah.
A couple of things. I mean, one in general, for me, I mean, I'm just thinking back to an email I sent our board last week. For an example, so we had a really fortunate opportunity at the Clinton Global Initiative this year, where they invited one of our field managers to speak, and she presented at the conference. It was webcast. It was a huge success. And helping, and one of the things we did before is, notifying people that this was happening, because not a lot of people could be there. It's sort of it's a very sort of tightly closed event. It's very expensive to attend as well, but there's a lot of people that could participate through webcasts and other things, and helping us advocate that to the board members and their networks beyond our organization. So, helping spread the message of what it is that we're doing and becoming advocates for what it is that we're doing, because we have board members from P&G, from former UNICEF directors, from other sort of grant-making organizations. All of them have their own very sort of deep networks coming from very diverse areas that we want to get in front of, and we want them to know about our organization. So advocating what it is that we're doing and the progress that we're having, I think is sometimes overlooked and is a key benefit that a board can play. And then I think also just like the board members' own sort of specific expertise can often be, support key members of staff. To Alan's point, we're a very thin organization that we all have to wear many hats, and our board members have a lot of expertise. Whether it's through helping us understand sourcing products, helping us better understand how to work with press and media, or a whole host of other things. So thinking about how the board members can bring their own talent to bear in the development of key staff is another thing I think it would be encouraging for members to proactively come out and offer up for support.
Kind of to comment on Chris's comment really quick, is that a really effective exercise to kind of draw that out is that at a board meeting, you can do what they call treasure mapping, right? You treasure map your organization and your own so that you can start listing, the different constituents and people that you have connections to and the different expertise, and kind of draw that out.
Chapter in here on doing
Excellent.
I mean, we do it probably once a year, and you always find different connections that you hadn't thought of. Yeah.
Cool.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Of you, Dad? And both for the benefit of the room and for the benefit of being able to share whatever you share with us with other people down the road. So you're on a board, or you're a big fan of a nonprofit, and you want to help fundraise, and you have a lot of friends and some business colleagues, and you've lived here a while, and I just would love it if you could talk a little bit about how you think about sharing the organizations that you're essentially fundraising for, but that you care about, with the people in your life, and kind of what does that look like practically in terms of just how it plays out, any pitfall, any things you've learned along the way, or
Well, yeah, I mean, I had, lots of things.
I'm sorry, is it
One of the
Sorry.
things I wish I had done a few years ago, and it's probably not, I suppose it's never too late, I should do it now, is my own personal database, my own Salesforce of my treasure map. And the reason I say that is because I'm on more than one board, and I have more than one cause that I raise money for, and I have trouble keeping straight who I've asked for what, or who I've invited to what event, or whatever. So, I mean, just to make an easy example, if I want to invite somebody to a fly event, and I'm going to send them an email or call them, do I need to explain to them what FLY is and that I'm on the board of FLY and so on? Or would that sound dumb because they already came to a FLY event 2 years ago that I invited them to, and so they know perfectly well that I'm on the board and what it is and so on. And I used to think that I could just do that from memory, but my memory maybe isn't as good as it was or whatever, or it's an issue for me. So there's a learning. I think I actually need a more formal system to keep track so that I actually can look and see, oh yeah, gee, Bill came to that FLY breakfast in 2009. He knows what FLY is. I don't have to tell him what FLY is or that I'm on the board of FLY. Beyond that, one of the points that I think is so excellent in this book, and I think it was in the Loring presentation too, from reading the notes on it, is that the old style model of fundraising where it's just reciprocal giving. You ask me to your fundraiser and I'll give money, and then I'm going to ask you to my fundraiser and you give money. That's passe. That's totally old school. That's not how you get lifelong donors. It's not really what you should be going for. Now maybe you're on the board of an organization that's like that, and fine, but it needs to start migrating away from it, I think, if it's going to be modern. And so that's not how, I don't think of it in terms of that, that there's some reciprocal thing going on. I think of it in terms of is this something these people would be interested in? Is there some reason why this person might? And the other thing that I have found, kind of after something you said, Sherri, is you just never know. Like FLY, I think probably all of you know what FLY does, and it deals with kids who are in the juvenile justice system. And I one time spent 10 minutes at dinner explaining to a friend all about FLY, how excited I was about FLY and so on. And she said at the end of it, she said, I just don't think juvenile delinquents are my thing. Okay. But I mean, bless and release. Well,
Yeah.
something else is her thing, that's great. But on the other hand, what I have found with FLY is that you just never know.
Yeah.
I mean, the people will respond at a really deep level. People you never think of, a guy who's like a senior partner at one of the big law firms here on the Peninsula, very, proper, distinguished lawyer and so on, and he just about came out of his chair when I told him about FLY. What is it? Well, it goes back to his childhood. He had a really good friend in childhood who got into drugs and got crossways and wound up in juvenile hall. And he thought, there but for the grace of God, that could have been me. And he just totally related to this idea of kids in the juvenile justice system. Who knew? And he's given thousands of dollars and gotten his law firm to sponsor things and so on. I had no idea. And so, a lot of this is you kind of have to just cast the net, right, and then see what comes up, because there's no way to really predict it.
Other questions for our panelists?
And I think you can't take rejection personally either. They might have a lot of reasons. You have to have kind of a thick skin, but they could have a lot of reasons for not wanting to give. They might have financial problems or whatever that you just don't know. So you just move on to the next.
You're absolutely
prospect.
right. Absolutely right. But the corollary of that is don't make the ask personal. I mean, it gets back to this. Get away from that old model where you're asking them to give money because they're your friend and you ask them.
And it's the first time they've heard of you or something,
They know anything about this organization. You're telling them about the organization and asking them for money in the same conversation as though, how could they possibly be supporting this for any reason other than just that you asked them? And then if they don't, there is a tendency to say, well, wait, I asked you and you didn't do it. But that's not if the approach is, no, I'm just laying this out there.
Right. It's an opportunity. They can take it or not.
Absolutely. And it's not about you, and it's not, You're not asking him to do it as a personal favor. You're making the opportunity available.
Eric?
For the panelists who have held benefit events,
Mm.
how has that experience been, and what wisdom do you have to share?
For benefit events.
We use, I'm not a super event heavy kind of person, you know? I'd like to, because I think unless you've got a volunteer base that's helping you, I mean, it takes up a lot of staff time. But we do have one event a year that is more of a mission-based event. It's a free event. Actually have invitations. It's a free event. It gets somewhat underwritten. It's an opportunity to just learn more about our organization. And it's a starting point for some, and for some, it's an opportunity to give because we've been cultivating them. So in the audience, there's usually a mix of people in the audience, and we tell everyone there's an opportunity to give at the end of the event, but it's not required. You know, again, you know, it's permission-based. We don't want anyone to feel blindsided. So that's all part of the invitation process, and it's all driven by table hosts who host, you know, 9 to 10 guests, and so they know somebody coming into the event, and that's our one big event that we have. It's not really a gala. It's first thing in the morning. My personal philosophy, I think, is that there are so many gala events out there, and people are so busy that if there are associations or, you know, there's traditional galas that I think are really successful, and I think those are awesome. But if you don't have that to have something, you know, mission-based and for others to learn more about what you do and to get involved. That's basically the events that we've had. And thank you events for donors and then our tours, but we didn't do a lot of events.
You just had a house party, didn't you?
Yes, we did. Yeah, so we have smaller events where we just had our first one actually, so we just experienced this, a house party where one of our donors wanted to invite their friends to learn more about Peninsula Bridge, and that was great. That was really well received. So again, you know, getting donors involved and interested is only the first step. The second step, the follow-through, is everything. You can get as many people in the room as you want, but if you don't have any follow-up, then you're not, you know, cultivating those donors. So
We haven't done events. We did have recently, though. There's a sort of a event PR boutique thing out of New York that from some of the former founders of Charity Water, who are starting to offer as a service this type of fundraising and events, and they've brought us on as one of their sort of 4 marquee partners. And so they held an event for us recently. And so they manage it, they do all the invitation. What we did as far as giving them support is, you know, sent them some materials. We have some videos, we have some, you know, brochures and that kind of thing. It happened to just, by luck, coincide with when our field manager from Uganda was in New York.
Oh.
And so we sent her in a taxi down there, and she spoke, and it was a huge hit. But we don't ever manage them in-house because we just don't have the resources to do that right now. Yeah.
I think there's another perspective on that, which maybe others here may share. I understand what you say about the staff time, but what I've observed in terms of attracting new donors is people like to give to events because it's a finite thing. You know, I'll go and I'll sponsor this event, or I'll buy a ticket or 3 tickets or whatever. I think there's always a difference of opinion amongst the professional staff versus the board members on this topic. Boards I've been on where we've encouraged the staff to take on events and to do an annual breakfast or a dinner or an auction or whatever it may be. The staff, you know, often is reluctant for obvious reasons, totally understandable. That said, that is a major way to get new donors in that you might not otherwise, because it's a thing, it's a finite thing, it's a night, it's a morning. So there is a role in for that, I think, in terms of donor development.
yeah,
It kind of gets to a point that Sherri made earlier about short-term or long-term horizon, right? Like you have a golf tournament where nobody knows, maybe you're going to say something about golf tournaments, but where nobody knows about you before or after. You know, like Chuck Lorre would say, your error there is you have a bunch of suspects. You didn't convert them to prospects, so don't put them in your database and start treating them like prospects. Like if it was a fundraiser and they paid to play golf, fine, I mean, well, consider making it more of a mission-driven thing, but versus saying, gosh, if this event is really about conservation and stewardship, and it's longer-term view, right? Like, we may not, the event may, break even, or maybe not, maybe we underwrite the event so that we can cultivate. But I think that distinction of, is it really a fundraising event, and if it is it short-term, long-term, whatever, versus is it a cultivation? And then if it is a cultivation and stewardship event, and this gets to dashboards and it's a little bit tricky, but if we were gonna hold our own feet to the fire, how are you gonna have some way to assess if it worked? Right, I mean, did
That's the
people
next
who were
step.
there end up giving, was it successful? So, but I think that the point is a really good one.
Yeah, and I think, when you're an organization, you have to lay it all out. There's no right or wrong, and I think it's different for every organization as well. You only have so much capacity, and where are we going to focus our attention? And as that organization grows, there might be more capacity. And I think the question is that if we're having an event, is there a next step? If there's not a next step, then
Raise a lot of
who's
money.
creating? Yeah, exactly. I either have to raise a lot of money, or we need to be able to justify it. So it's being able to lay it out, and if it can be justified, then great. I would go ahead and do it. Like I said, but it's asking, kind of that follow-up question is, why are we doing it? How are we justifying it? What's the capacity? And how does it fit into exactly?
Because Chuck's issue about the golf tournament, that's not inherently something that's going to do any education on your cause. So it better raise a lot of money on its own. Otherwise, you'd be much better doing like International Justice Commission does, where they'll have a dinner, and then they've got you captive, and they don't ask you for any money, but boy, you're going to watch that video, and you're going to leave crying, and you're educated at that point. I mean, that's a different kind of event.
Exactly.
Well, I think those kinds of like the gala dinner and the auction and all that stuff, you can raise a lot of money or something like that. I would say that's a kind of event that works best for a school, or you need a couple things. You need a lot of volunteers, because it takes a tremendous amount of time, and most organizations don't have enough staff to do it. So, think about all the silent auction, finding all the people to give all the stuff, and all the, it's tremendous volunteer time.
Thank you,
You can burn up volunteers too.
It
So
seems
that's
like it's going into your passe bucket a little bit.
well, it's the old school approach, yeah. But if you have the volunteers and you have the people who are your natural audience to come, the parents, the and so on, you can raise a lot of money that way.
As long as the parents have money.
Yeah.
Well, that was the next thing I was going to say.
It doesn't work. When I was on Downtown College Prep Sport, what do you do in terms of an event? They decided, some people decided they wanted to do something, so they had, I think they made tamales or something and sold, but, and they raised $400, which was a big deal for the parent community to raise, but, that's not the kind of stuff we're talking about.
You don't want to spend thousands of dollars organizing the tamale thing.
And time.
Well, Jeannie, you're right. I mean, and gala events are very expensive. Golf tournaments are very expensive. It costs a couple $100 a player to rent the golf course right off the bat. So, think about, wow, your fixed cost in this thing is huge. But a big gala dance and stuff, wow, you spend a lot of money doing that. Now, probably doesn't pencil for most organizations unless, to your point, Jamie, you've got an audience of really rich people. Because then you can, there's one good friend of mine puts on, or is instrumental in putting on every year here in the Bay Area, it's a charity that supports causes in India, helping the poor in India. And it's the Indian business community, and boy, it's amazing. People are wearing these saris that are so gorgeous, and it's beautiful and it's nice. And obviously, it costs a fortune to put it on, but usually, the money that is being bid for stuff and so on. They're raising millions of dollars in this one night. Well, okay, but you got to have people who can do that. You got to have that audience. So for most organizations, I don't know if it's really feasible. You don't have the volunteer base, you don't have the rich people to come. Probably that's not the right kind of event, for you to be
And the ones that work, they do it year after year. I mean, that's not the first year they did it. Like that Rodin, they've been doing it for 20 years. It's $1,000 a ticket minimum.
It's a tradition, and people
Yes,
look forward to
and
it
the
every
same
year.
sponsors,
and
the
so,
same people,
yeah.
you know, the same group.
Yeah, and it becomes a thing. It's part of the social calendar.
Exactly,
You know, you're gonna
exactly.
go to this every year.
Yeah.
But that's, and so it's great, it has a place, but it doesn't work for every organization. If you look, there's a lot about events in here I recommend you read. You know, there's this point of entry event, like you're talking about having a house party, where you're not asking people for money, you're just trying to educate them, you're casting your net, you're trying to find people who might be interested. You have your what Sherri Aspergerg calls the free 1 hour ask event, where you're going to gather a bunch of people together. You've got their permission. They know that you're going to ask them for money, and you do it. I think your breakfast sounds like it's kind of a combination of it's both. I mean, it's a point of entry for some people, and it's an ask event for some people. Also, I mean, you know, this is not like religious dogma here. You don't have to do it exactly the way she says, but you know, the point is, so you have these are different kinds of events. Then you have sort of thank you events where you're not asking people for money. You're cultivating your donors. You're inviting people to come to an event out of your gratitude as an organization and your desire to have them be part of your family. And that is a very powerful kind of thing to do. You know, maybe it's a graduation of the kids in the program, or it's some other kind of thing where it's not a fundraiser per se. It's a cultivation. Thank you.
Another aspect of that thank you that I think would be really critical is an articulation, a quantification of what the given dollars have accomplished. People don't want to
The
just be
impact.
thanked, but they want to know they made a difference. You can
Yeah.
kind of articulate that at the same time.
So everybody, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I know lots of you have to run right out. And so if you can, stay after and chat with our panelists, great. Or if you have follow-up questions, feel free to email me and I'll pass them along. But a big, big thank you to our panelists. Thank you.